Hello, this is the second video that I'm recording in lieu of the video of last lecture, which was accidentally not saved. So in the background you might hear a washing machine because, as I've mentioned before, my office is adjacent to the laundry room, as well as I have a little dog chewing on a bone, so I hope that kind of slobbering chewing sound is not apparent in the recording. But anyways, this video will be very short. Essentially, I'm just going to go through Enscape. I find it's quite an intuitive visualization program. Essentially, what Enscape is it's a program that allows you to create walkthroughs. So in the manner of a first-person video game, these can be either on screen, or if you have a VR headset, you can also use a VR headset. It can create videos. It can export standalone walkthroughs, which is great to give to a client or a friend who doesn't have Rhino or Revit. It can also create still images, so renders, and that's sort of what you'll be focusing on for assignment 2. So the first thing I want to let you know about is just getting your Enscape tabs. So once you've installed Enscape, essentially you're going to have these two tabs here. If you don't have these two tabs, you can just click on the little toolbar. Under the Options tab, you can go Show Toolbar. And essentially what's going to happen is, if you, just moving into the window, if you go down to the bottom of that drop-down menu, you'll see Enscape and Enscape Capturing. The other thing I want to mention right off the very bat, because I feel that some of you are going to have this issue, is I just want to troubleshoot a flickering problem to sort of catch it before it affects too many of you. And now in this demo model I'm using, my origin point is somewhere around here. Since we've imported geolocated data from the City of Vancouver's Open Data, essentially its origin point is going to be way far away. So essentially it's considering the origin point. I'm not exactly sure where. Who knows? Maybe somewhere in the center of Vancouver, maybe near City Hall or something. So our site's going to be very, very, very far away from that. So essentially what you're going to find, and I'll just move this. I'll move this to maybe 100,000 units by 1,000,000 units far away. And what you might find is, if you go into Enscape, and let's see if it happens. Yeah, it's barely happening here, but you're gonna get something like this. So if you see how it's flickering there, if this does happen to you, simply the way to fix it is to select your model and make sure to select all your layers, all your meerkat layers, all your materials layers, sort of unlock everything, select everything, and then just choose a corner of your model and go transform move, and then just type 0, 0, 0, hit enter, view, zoom, select it all, and then restart Enscape. So I just wanted to mention that problem right off the bat, because I can already anticipate a few of you having that issue. So if you are getting that flickering issue, that's what's going wrong. So anyways, once you click on your main Enscape tab, essentially you're going to see a few different buttons here. So Start Enscape, which just starts Enscape. And then all of these will sort of go through as we need to. So I'm going to start Enscape. So clicking the little yellow square with a green arrow button. I'm going to sort of put my Rhino window side by side with my Enscape video, just so we can see both. Now, I won't go through all of the movement controls, because you should see this information panel at the bottom of your Enscape window. And I mean, if any of you are gamers, these WASD controls are probably pretty intuitive for you. If it's been quite a while since you've picked up a computer game like myself, it's still pretty easy to sort of get a grasp on. And if you don't see this menu at all, just hit H and it will bring that menu up. So from within Enscape, using these controls here, not only can you move around, you can fly, you can walk. So now I'm walking. You can run very fast, as well as you can change the time of day. So I'll just let you sort of refer to these options right here. When you are in Enscape, there are a few different options. So if you click on the little eye option window, this is the visual settings. So there's going to be a few things that come up in the rendering. So first, outlines, pretty self-evident. It just gives outlines to all your geometry, and this can actually be quite nice. I really don't mind how this looks as long as they're used subtly. So if you want to include outlines, feel free to do so. The other thing you can do is change your mode. So none will set it to the mode where all your materials will appear. So this is probably going to be the mode you can use. You can see from the previous video I have my gravel set up here. You can switch to white, which just takes the texture off of everything. However, notice that it still keeps the bump map. You'll also see the grass texture is still possible as well, and I'll sort of get into that. And trees and assets, you know, like people, like poles, yada, they will also appear just white. Polystroll is like white mode, except you can apparently slightly change the amount of light that goes through the material, and I think this is supposed to emulate kind of a classic foam core or white foam model. And then finally, light view, which might be interesting to use for perhaps a studio project, a quick analysis of how many lux are following in a certain area of your design, maybe for an interior space. For the purposes of this course, we won't really worry about this. So I'll switch to none. As well as there's a few other controls here. I won't go through too much, but you can control your exposure. So it's just kind of like a camera. If you turn off auto exposure, you can see that we can, you know, overexpose, underexpose, yada, yada. I usually turn on auto exposure. Depth of field, so also like a camera. You can see that with a very narrow depth of field, things are blurry unless they are the focus point, which is in the center of the screen. You can switch it to 0 for everything to be in focus. For the purposes of our course, you'll probably want to set your depth of field to 0, as well as field of view. So we will play with this, but essentially this allows you to switch from a very wide angle lens, so maybe a fisheye type lens, to a very narrow field of view. So this would be like a telephoto lens, and this is probably what we're actually going to use for our axonometric drawing, but I'll get to that. As well as if your computer is really struggling to sort of move around, you can always change your rendering quality to draft, and you can see it just makes the image a little bit more grainy. Maybe the light isn't as smooth, but I mean, for the sake of, you know, use the highest quality saying you can. I was on high, and that seems fine to me. Ultra, I don't think there's too much of a difference between ultra and high. Yeah, now I'm on ultra, and it looks fine. The shadows maybe move a little bit more slowly when I change the time of day. Furthermore, you can click on image, and this is just going to change things like the highlight shadows. So you can play around with contrast. If you want saturation, you can desaturate image, hypersaturate your image. I'll just leave it at 100%. Color temperature, make it cooler, make it warmer. Ambient brightness, that's just going to be the amount of ambient brightness, as well as, you know, some strange kind of effects like chromatic aberration, which kind of gives you that weird sci-fi almost look where everything looks slightly askew color-wise. A vignette, bloom. So you can play around with all these lens flare, yada yada, motion blur. For your background here, for our course, you'll probably use the white background. In fact, I'd encourage you to do so. But, you know, for other renders, you know, or at least for our axonometric, I'd encourage you to use white background. For perspectival renders, feel free to use the sky. And within here, you can adjust some other things. You can adjust fog. You can adjust the sun brightness. And I'll let you play around with all of this. Furthermore, you can change your background. So we have a skybox. Skybox is essentially just going to be like our clear sky here, except with the skybox, essentially you can load a file. So if you have a background image that you want to put into the background, you can load your own. But I usually just use clear, and then in clear you can change the clouds. So maybe this is a little bit more like Vancouver, you know, so play around with the cloud settings, just sort of see what looks good to your eye. But there are other backgrounds like a forest, mountains, town, urban. So you can see that these are kind of look strange for our site. They're out of scale. So one thing you can always do is you can change your light source. Like let's say you kind of like some of the greener, I don't know, tones that the forest casts upon your geometry. You can always choose the forest background and then switch it to white background, and it will have that same kind of light source from the background, except it will have a white background. Finally, for capture, these are your export settings, and we will go into these in a bit when we talk about making a render from Enscape. The other settings are just the general settings, so license, input, like sort of dealing with your mouse or whatnot, so feel free to look through there, but I will just leave it. One thing I want to show you, I have in my notes, is this is sort of building off of our textures setting, or our textures video, is that you can create grass in Enscape by using the keyword grass. So what I mean is, let's make a new material in Rhino. So I'm just going to go to my materials tab. I'm going to click create new material. I'll go custom, and I'll call it grass. Now, Enscape will look for this word grass in your materials, and it will apply a grass texture to this material regardless of whether or not it actually has a grass texture. So what I mean is, if I assign this grass material to this plane adjacent to the curved path right there, so I'll select this object, I'll right click grass and go assign to objects, you can see that Enscape has created a grass texture. It's white because we don't have an actual grass texture, but that is that. If we do want to change this to look more grassy, essentially now in our grass material, we can just go to textures, click to assign texture to our color channel, and select grass. So I have grass here. And now you can see we have this grass, which is way too big. You can see in the rendered view that's why. So quickly, I'll just rescale this and refer to the last video to see what I'm doing here, but I'll just quickly do it. There, so that looks like a little bit better grass. So Enscape does that automatically, so that's sort of a cool thing that it does. Another thing Enscape can do is it has this, you can see this Enscape asset library. So what we're going to do, if you remember, since we were sort of creating this site model from our City of Vancouver GIS data and LiDAR data, we have that trees point cloud. So essentially, if I go to my layers, I have a trees layer here, and you can see that it's, you know, off center because I moved this for a demonstration. So I'll just move it back on. So yours should be all lined up. I'll just move it like right there. So what we're going to do is there's no real way to recreate these trees from the LiDAR data. It's just, would be a fool's errand to try to somehow mesh these points. So what we're going to do instead is we're just going to use our wonderful pattern recognition loving human brains to place a tree in a point cloud shape that sort of matches said tree. So in this case, it looks like a coniferous tree. I'm not a landscape architect, so I don't know exactly what kind of coniferous tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on the little Enscape Asset tab. I'm going to go to Vegetation. And I'm going to find a tree that looks kind of like this tree. I'm also just going to close my Enscape window for now, just so maybe it loads a little bit faster. You can see there's also fallen leaves if you want to add some fallen leaves on your roads maybe. Oh, and I guess you can click on the tags here to make things load a little bit faster. So I'll click Evergreen and I'll select this spruce right there. That looks close enough. Now it's going to say Asset Placement, select the target surface. So what we'll do is we'll select this surface here and we'll place this approximately in the center of that point cloud. Now what we can do is we can just kind of move it, and using our gumball, we can sort of reposition and scale it. So again, gumball is just, you need to turn on gumball down there. So what I can do is I can scale it a little bit, make it a little bit chunkier. I will scale it in that direction, I'll pull it down, and that more or less fits within the point cloud. So that's what we're going to do. And then you can just drag out this tree to any other spaces that look like they need an evergreen. So I'll go right there, I'll place it there. When you're placing trees like this, it's best to kind of move them up or down a little bit, maybe stretch them out a little bit and rotate them, because it's going to look like they're actual different trees, not just the same tree copied it over and over and over. So we'll drag that one out again and we will rotate it a bit. Maybe stretch it a little bit so it looks slightly different, and that will be good. And we have two more here, so I might as well just place the trees as well. So you're going to go through this, and you're going to do this with all your trees in your site model, and this is going to create a very realistic looking set of foliage. And now you can also go and do these trees here, which look like kind of deciduous trees. I'm going to say, sure, they look like that one. Again, really tree naive. That's very small, so I'm going to scale it up. I'm going to roughly move into place. I will not be marking for, your tree selection, just as long as it kind of looks like the reality of the site. So maybe something like that. And finally, for lower trees, Enscape has a lot of good ground cover, so you can just put some ground cover on the hills here. So you could perhaps just put a bunch of bushes, and that one's tiny, so I'll make it a little bit bigger and put it all over the hill. So just grab a few different bushes, sort of spread them over. It looks like ground cover is also a thing, but it looks like most of these are just little flowers or leaves. So maybe I'll put some leaves on the ground as well, just to add a little bit of interest. So that's how you're going to place trees with Enscape. If you're not using Enscape, if you're on the Mac, you can import trees in the same way that we imported that train car in another video. So refer back to the video from, I think, 2 videos ago. It's just towards the end. It's where we talked about importing a train car, and you can just go online and search for 3D OBJ trees. So anyways, we place these trees in Enscape. And now you can see that the trees look pretty good. Oh, didn't want that. The grass looks terrible, so maybe choose a new grass texture, but the trees look good. The ground cover, it looks kind of like it came out of nowhere. So just use your best judgment to sort of create a realistic looking scene. Another thing you can do is you can place people, you can place light standards, for instance. So people, these are nice for scale. People sitting, people standing. So you can also place those in your model and sort of get a good looking model. Now, this woman here is floating a bit, so maybe I just want to move her down a bit. As well as street props. You know, look, see what's in here. It looks like there's some lamps. I know these are kind of old-timey lamps, but who knows? Maybe for your park you want some old-timey lamps. So you can do stuff like that, and it will kind of make your model look much more realistic. So what I want to get into now is syncing views between Enscape and Rhino. And what I mean by that is, for this assignment, we're supposed to create an axonometric in this section. You can create a perspectival view as well if you want, but at the very minimum, you need to have a section and a perspectival view. So, or axonometric view, sorry. So for the axonometric view, what we're going to do is we're going to click on our perspective window drop-down tab. We're going to go to set view, isometric, and then you're going to choose one of these isometric views that you like. So again, click on the little drop down, go to set view, isometric, and choose one of these directions. Once you have that, you can start Enscape. And what you're going to see is that your views don't really line up. So the first thing you want to do is you want to click on this little icon right here, enable disable view synchronization. Make sure it is enabled. So now you can see they still don't look much the same, but what happens is if I rotate around in my Rhino window, Enscape will try to update. Now, the axonometric is kind of a special view because it's parallel and it has zero field of view. So what we can do is we can go to set view, isometric, whatever view you want. And then under the Enscape visual settings window, so I'm going to open that visual settings, I'm going to change my field of view to 10%, making it a parallel view. And now I'm going to zoom out. And now what you can see happens is it's more or less a axonometric parallel view. These two views are more or less synced up. So this is how we're going to make this overall axonometric view. I think it's the easiest way to do so. Once you're happy with this, so your view right here, what you can do now is you can save it by clicking on this little camera button in the Enscape tab. And I'll just call it Enscape Axo. And essentially what this is going to do is it's going to create a view. It's going to create a named view in Rhino with the current Enscape camera position and settings. So for example, now if we click on our little parallel tab here, formerly perspective, go to set view, and then under name views, Enscape Axo, we select that. and you'll see it'll automatically go to that view in the Enscape tab again. So that's just a nice way to save your view. So I'm going to go back to my perspective mode because it's kind of hard to navigate around this isometric view. So again, I'll just click on this little drop down, go to set view, and then perspective. And I'll type Control-Alt-E to sort of zoom selected all, or zoom extend, sorry. The second view that we need to do for assignment 1 is the rendered section. So I'll show you how to do that in Enscape. So essentially what you're going to want to do is first you're going to want to switch from perspective mode, click the little drop down menu there, and go to set view 2-point perspective. And then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to your set view tab, and you're going to want to click on look at surface. So set view, look at surface, and we're going to select that surface right here. So one of your edge surfaces. And now you can see, you can kind of pan around, but we have a 2-point perspective view, but it's oriented to the surface. Finally, what we want to do is we want to make a clipping plane. So type clipping plane. Make sure you click vertical, and then you're going to go into your top window, and you're going to draw your essentially your section cut wherever you want it. So I'll say right there. And the height, you'll drag it up in your right, front, or perspective window, and then you can see that you have your section cut like so. And from here, you can simply go to Enscape and start Enscape. And of course, make sure that your view synchronization is enabled. And so you can see I have lots of fog in this image, kind of Silent Hill, but you know, this is how you do your section cut. Now, in Photoshop afterwards, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to sort of trace this edge and fill it in, or just erase it so you don't see all this kind of gross underneathness of your open surfaces. So that's how you're going to do your section cut. Now, once you've done your section cut and you've set up your axonometric drawing, the final thing to do is to export it. So to do that, essentially, you're going to have Enscape open in the view you're happy with, and you're going to click on your Enscape visual settings tab. So that's a little eye sliders button there. And you're going to go to your capture settings, and you are essentially going to go to your custom. And what you're going to do is you're just going to figure out an export setting that has this aspect ratio. So 1920 by 1080, maybe it's a little bit small. So essentially, maybe let's say we want to go to 2500 by, you can just use your calculator, 2500 times aspect ratio of, or sorry, divide by 1.78, divide by 1.78 equals about 1400. So that gives us more or less the same aspect ratio. The other thing you want to do is export the object ID, material ID, and depth channel. And essentially what this is going to do is it's allow you to export out a clipping mask. The depth range essentially, so if you scroll over, it says the maximum distance from the camera that is encoded as black in the depth image. So what we want to do is we want to set this to 1. And what this means is that if something is greater than 1 away from the camera, if it is something, then it will be white. And if it's not something, it will be black. So what happens is now we can click on Enscape capturing with our, again, our Enscape window open. We can click on the create a rendering of the current Enscape view. And you can see if we go to our Enscape window, at least eventually, it will show us the little export bar. So let's go back here. Oh, so that first time didn't work, so I'll click it again. This pop-up menu will come. Just save it to whatever folder you want. So I'll just say Enscape Capture and rename it if you want. Click Save. And then now you'll see that little bar that tells you how long till your render's done. So once you have that, I'm just going to close that. I'm going to close all this. We can essentially go to our Enscape Capture folder, and you can see we have a few different things. So we have our actual Enscape render. We have our depth map, so we'll use that as a clipping plane. Our material ID if you want to separate materials, and another material ID. Or this is the object ID, sorry. So what we can do is we can open our sort of textured, in this case very foggy looking Enscape render. We can also go File, Open. This is in Photoshop, of course. Our depth map. And what we're going to do is we're going to just select our depth map, select all of it, go Copy. Then we're going to take our background image here. We're going to double click on it in the Layers panel to create a new layer. So now this is a layer over the background. We will click the little masking icon here. So it's that little rectangle with a circle in it. And then we will we'll hold Alt and click on the mask layer right there. And then we'll go Edit, Paste, our depth map. And what this is going to do, anything that's white will not be cropped. Anything that is black will be cropped. So if we click Alt or hold Alt and click our mask layer again, you can see that what that does is it gets rid of all the background automatically, which is really nice around the trees, for instance. So if we want to have a sort of vibrant, let's say yellow background, we can quickly and easily using this. So once you get to this point, as I mentioned, you would probably want to do this a lot more carefully, but you'd want to draw out your section cut like so. So I'm doing this very sloppily, but that's kind of what you'd want to do. Oops. So I'll do it even more sloppy. Like that. Make it black, make it white. Maybe in this case, yeah, black looks fine. And then you'd probably want to image, you just crop your image. So that would be a rendered section cut. Very poorly done in this case, but that gives you an idea of what it should kind of look like. So the last thing I want to do is sort of show you a method that allows you to build up an image in a different manner without Enscape. So if you're not using Enscape, you can always explore using Rhino Render or a different rendering engine of your choice. And what you would do is you would figure out the view you want. So in this case, let's say our axo here. I'll turn off my trees. And essentially what you're going to do is you're just going to click the little blue render button. And this is Rhino Render here. It's not great. It's not bad. Play around with the settings. I'll post a link to Rhino Render in the video description so you can kind of find out more about it. But if you're going to not use Enscape, that's how you do it. You could, of course, use V-Ray, Lumion, Maxwell, whatever else you want to use to render this scene. The other thing you can always do as well is just build up an image. And what I mean by that is you can, let's say, set your view to shaded. You can turn off surface edges to sort of get your shaded mode like so. You can type view capture to clipboard. You can scale up your image there, click OK. And then in Photoshop, you can just start pasting things in. So there's my background. Now I can go back to Rhino, go view, set it to pen. Now same thing, view capture to clipboard, edit, paste. Now I can set this layer's transparency to multiply, for instance, and then you can start building up your image like so. So, you know, you could always start photoshopping textures in here if you wanted to. You could incorporate a Rhino render image, but this is just sort of an alternate way to go about visualizing your site model if you don't have Enscape. And of course, if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to email me. And next week, we will start to get into the parametric bridge and sort of more into Grasshopper now that we have our site model developed.